Hello and welcome back to another episode of the MXGP Podcast Show on Vital MX. But this is not just another episode. This is a very, very special edition, a long time coming. We are finally going to jump in the time machine and go back to 2008 to discuss all that happened some 16 years ago, maybe? I probably should have worked that out beforehand. Thank you to Polysport, All Balls Racing and EVS Sports for their continued support of this podcast. We will hear more from them shortly. But for now, I'm your host, Lewis Phillips, as per usual, joined by the man who is going to have to put in a lot more legwork than normal on this podcast. It's all him. It's Paddock Pass Podcast's Adam Wheeler. How's it going?
Hello, Lewis. Am I going to be paid extra for this podcast? Because not only have you reminded me of how old I am, but I'm also having to raid the memory banks a little bit more. So I apologize in advance for any inaccuracies.
Well, the good news is I'm not sure there will be anyone who can pull you up on the inaccuracies. A couple of riders have reached out to give me their verdict on 2008. Some asked us not to talk about it at all, which we'll get into because that's a whole chapter in itself. But no, I think this is going to be great. I have a lot of questions, a lot of unanswered questions, and I wasn't sure the fans shared that notion. But as soon as I asked for questions, they came flooding in. And unfortunately, the poll that I teased on the previous episode, 2005, my choice versus 2008, I got trampled. It wasn't even a competition.
Why did you pick those 2 years out of interest?
Well, you picked 2008 and I picked 2005. We did this on the last podcast, remember?
Yeah, but I said 2008 because of the way the championship went all the way down in both classes to the final Grand Prix. And I think that season just seems to stick out a little bit more in my mind for some reason. Of course, not all the minor details, but 2005 was also pretty memorable.
2005 is, in my mind, the greatest season ever, bar 2021. But unfortunately, we don't get to talk about that today because the fans have spoken and we are a men of the people. I was going to say we are a man of the people.
We're the podcast of the people.
We are a podcast of the people. But before we get to any of that, the FIM Awards, they happened in Mallorca this past weekend. You were there. The FIM seemed to be very proactive in becoming more relatable, accessible. I don't know. But yeah, what was your verdict on that event?
Love him or hate him, you have to say that Jorge Villegas, the FIM president, has certainly been working overtime to make the federation or the governing body seem more accessible, as you say, or more presentable. I mean, the previous incumbents they didn't even sort of attempt to speak English in press conferences, and their presence was negligible, I think, for the role that the FIM has to play, because it's not just in, putting a logo or a stamp on a series. They do a lot of work behind the scenes, whether it's, helping government policies towards motorcycling in general. There's quite a lot of activity going on. And Villegas has, really sort of drilled the FIM into sort of modern times, I guess you could say. I was surprised in Mallorca to learn that it was only the 14th time they'd actually had one of these kind of award dues. In the past, motorcycle series tend to have their own. I mean, I've been to MXGP award ceremonies. Infra Motor Racing, or Ustream as it was then, used to have a relationship with the state of Monaco. And, I've been twice to Monaco for very sort of flash events. MotoGP did their own one as well. But this was just sort of the 14th year that the FIM have done something. And, the pomp and the scale of it is really impressive. I mean, there was nearly like 1,000 people there. You had a lot of the champions. If they weren't there, then they were phoning in sort of messages. Jorge Prado, Luis, as we know, had a practice crash, suffered like a hit to the head. It hasn't been verified it was actually a concussion or not, but it was enough for him not to, understandably make a transatlantic trip just for, a 48-hour period. I mean, Eli Tomac didn't make the journey either. Shane McElrath was there picking up his SX2 class World Championship medal. And Kai de Wolf, as well as Lottie Van Drunen, taking their gongs. And it's just cool to see like a lot of athletes in one place celebrating, basically peerless achievement in their discipline. I mean, it's quite sort of inspirational in a way. So yeah, it was a good do.
Yeah, I see a lot from social media. I see a lot of mutual respect amongst the athletes, which maybe I wouldn't necessarily expect. But also to your point about the fans, I'm really, and maybe I underestimate the fans, but I'm really surprised that fans turn up for this because I'd never see it advertised that fans can attend, and B, I just don't really feel like it's something that people would be interested in. But there we go.
Well, I mean, the event itself, the award ceremony itself, is live streamed on like various channels, but there's no sort of fans there. But there is activities beforehand where fans could meet riders.
So
I mean, in Spain, you had yeah, there was like a fans gathering, and of course in MotoGP you have Jorge Martin and David Alonso, two sort of Spanish riders. I mean, Alonso is officially sort of Colombian thanks to his parentage, but they obviously brought in a fair amount of attention, as did Giuseppe Garcia and Enduro. So you had that kind of excitement. In Liverpool, the previous year, there wasn't that much, but then the climate wasn't exactly friendly towards outside activities. But I think you'll see those kind of things being more fan-based, which, it should be.
Do we want to talk at all about the new MXGP calendar, which now includes Portugal and Great Britain and one less Indonesia?
Yeah, I mean, Portugal was confirmed. I think they signed the deal actually at the organisers meeting, which happens. I mean, the FIM Awards is not just like everybody takes along a tuxedo and has sort of a lot of free food and drink. There's also a lot going on in terms of meeting for the respective calendars for the various disciplines and divisions for the following season. It seems like people fly in from all over the world just to sort things out, ratify regulations and whatever else. And Info Motor Racing was doing that with MXGP. So Agueda is going to be the scene of the Portuguese Grand Prix. And also Steve Dixon was there. As we know, Matterley Basin tends to sort of hover on the outskirts of MXGP, doesn't it? And tends to plug a hole. I'm surprised by the date. I think it's early June.
June the 22nd.
Oh, so it's late June. But I mean, to really get into sort of closer to the summer months, I think is when it's most cost ineffective to run the British GP in that area of the world. But it's good that, there is going to be a British Grand Prix. And I guess Matterley is still sort of the premium circuit for it.
Yeah, In Front must be helping Steve with cost to have that event. And I'd imagine it's kind of, as you alluded to, I feel like Steve jumps in when In Front go, hey, look, we're in a bind. Let's bring you out of the shadows and make this work because we need you, because we don't really have another viable option. Hence, as well, why the date changes so much, is my assumption, at least.
Yeah, I would still, as we said, I think on previous podcasts, I would still like to see the British Grand Prix a different circuit, just to move it around a little bit. But, I mean, Steve Dixon, you just can't fault the guy's, commitment. Some would even say delusion to keep making the British Grand Prix happen every year. But from what I heard also in Mallorca, that, there's a little bit of, not concern, but some of the overseas events, I think they still have to be solidified. Australia for sure. MXGP is going back there for the first time since 2001. And it seems that Argentina is actually on quite a firm footing after moving from Neuquén to Cordoba. So that will be an interesting opening round for 2025 because it's a brand new venue.
Just one more bit of housekeeping. If you're watching this on YouTube, you will see a new news graphic on the screen now showing the 2025 calendar. That is new. So enjoy that, embrace it. Also, you may be watching this on Twitter for the first time because I'm trying to make that work. No Moto Podcast is on Twitter, so we're there now. Hello, Elon. Please sponsor us.
It's called X.
X? No, well, now Elon's not going to sponsor us. And we will be on Spotify videos soon as well, but I'm just trying to understand how exactly I get us on there. But that's in the motion. So trying to fill some holes where Moto Podcasts currently aren't. Some would call that sensible, some would call it pointless ambition, but I choose to decide it's sensible. So that's what we're doing. Anyway, let's go, Adam. Are you ready to enter 2008?
Are you going to have like some whooshing noise for like a time capsule thing?
No, I should have. All I can offer is for you to tell you, roads, Adam, where we're going, we don't need roads. Did you get that reference?
88 miles an hour, eh?
Oh, you got the reference. Hey! Also, that was wrong technically that only works if we're going into the future. Where we're going, we definitely still have roads.
If it's back to the future.
Yeah, but we're going back
and also
to the past.
Some of the tracks in 2008, probably were classified as roads as well in terms of track preparation.
Where we're going, we don't need roads. So let's set the scene a little bit. 2008, first of all, you were in the paddock every single week. What were you doing? Who were you working for? Where was your career at that point?
2008 was my 7th year in MXGP. My first season had been 2001. And actually, in 2008, I was working principally for Yamaha. I was doing a lot of their press releases. I was working for an agency that was representing the brand and also the factory team, which was run by Michele Rinaldi. And up until that point, I'd been sweeping pretty much everything in the championship, thanks to Stefan Everts, of course. And yeah, it was still a busy time. I was writing for the likes of Racer X. I think I was still doing some stuff for Cycle News. There were some other sort of, goodness, in those heady days of media, there were magazines still around, Lewis, believe it or not. There had been publications like Motocross Illustrated, set up by Steve Cox, and there had been, quite a few outlets to be able to get sort of work out there. So it wasn't really like, videos were still like a distant thing, but, it was still pretty, what's the word? To be a journalist in motocross was actually quite profitable, or possible at least. So it was, and also it wasn't like a crazy calendar. You didn't have Grand Prix events that were submerged with support classes. So it actually felt like it was possible to cultivate relationships and actually, kind of exist in the paddock and curate these kind of connections without having to stress about another session being on the track or just like a very tight window for turnaround.
Well, now
what were you doing?
Now you've just made me really want to work in 2008. That was quite depressing, to be honest. This current time is terrible. I was, 11, 12, I think. I would have been racing at Mid Sussex and East Kent every weekend, and then watching. I guess I wouldn't have been able to watch it on my phone at that point because we wouldn't have had iPhones. So I guess I would have been watching it when I got home. But anyway, I don't think it was possible to watch it live. No. The two MX1 motos were live on Eurosport, and then their MX2 class was 1 p.m. on a Monday because I always had to record it when I was at school.
What about Freecaster? Do you remember that?
I remember that, but for some reason I don't remember ever using it. I feel like I struggled to use it, or I couldn't use it, or I don't really remember where that even came from or slotted into history.
Just to give some explanation, Freecaster was like a YouTube. It was a version of YouTube where motocross content was on there for free. Initially, it was just like kind of feature videos, but then there was a deal sign where it expanded to like the full set. I mean, you could watch all the motos and even more, I think, on Freecaster. It was kind of the forerunner to MXGP TV, I guess. And I don't know how it made revenue. I think it was just through advertising. I mean, Braum were one of their sort of partners, and it just fed off kind of email addresses and whatever else. And I think it was actually quite a shrewd move by MXGP. Of course, it wasn't MXGP then. It was still sort of MX1 and MX2, the FIM Motocross World Championship. But it was a decent move, I think, to just gather audience. I mean, people could find the sport for free online. What is this?
So I forgot that there used to be bronze signage around the track. So was that, in fact, not an MXGP deal and some sort of like, hey, we're Freecaster, we're going to show MXGP, but you need to expose our sponsors?
Yeah. That was it. It was a cross-media deal. Okay. That was it. It was where both the sport and the platform were kind of mutually beneficial. And I don't know the reason. I think it was kind of Freecaster was a Belgian project. I don't know the reason why it fell through. I guess, Ustream, In Front Motor Racing's incarnation at that point, realized that it could be monetized to more effect with MXGP TV.
Well, there we go. We've already answered one question that I didn't know the answer to. How informative. So to set the scene racing-wise, and now I will talk for a while, so great time for you to drink. We're coming off of a heartbreaking 2007 season where the great, incredible Josh Coppins was well on his way to an MX1 championship, a long overdue MX1 championship, and had a heartbreaking crash in Lockett, which some of us have not forgiven Lockett for. He was 107 points clear, got hurt, tried to come back, couldn't, ultimately lost. Steve Ramon was the defending champion in 2008. Heading into 2008, I presume everyone's assumption was Coppins will just come back and do exactly what he did in 2007. No need to worry about Ramon. I would guess that maybe Strybos was considered the 1B to Coppins 1A, but Philipparts, Barragan, Nagel, Seb Porcel, none of them were really on the radar because everyone presumed Coppins was just going to copy and paste the 2007 season without the bad luck.
Yes, and more context as well. That was Coppins was signed to replace Stefan Everts. Everts retired at the end of 2006, of course, and Josh came in as Yamaha's lead rider. And I looked this up, Lewis, is actually in one article that I wrote in 2008. But Josh finished third in the 2007 MX1 World Championship, despite only scoring 7 points in the last 5 rounds. And I think those 7 points came from that one moto he tried to do at Donington Park.
Honestly?
Can you imagine finishing third in the World Championship after scoring 7 points in 5 rounds?
Well, first of all, it
shows you how far ahead it was.
This shows how much this season hurt Lewis's development as a human. I distinctly remember that, like, you could have said to me, Lewis, what did Coppins finish at Donington? And I would have gone 14th in one moto. Like, that is stored. I would never be able to let that go. I've only just realised that I stored that. But second of all, that's Jeffrey Hurlings-esque. Like, that really puts context around how good Coppins was, because the only time we've seen similar to that is Jeffrey Hurlings.
Yeah.
But
Yamaha are in this strange bind. I mean, they still were using YZ450Fs, I think, without fuel injection. I mean, it was already quite an antiquated motorcycle going into 2008. Unforgettably, it was the first season where Monster Energy came into the sport as like a team sponsor. So those blue bikes had turned black. And it was a bit of a strange situation reversal, because in 2007, Mark Deruva had jumped out of MX2 to partner Josh Coppins, but then he had sustained a big concussion. He kind of sort of fell out with the team. He was still very young. There was a bit of a misalignment of, I don't know, I guess you can say priorities, and Deruva was ejected from that squad in favor of David Philipparts for 2008. And Deruva had a tough time as a rookie, but then Philipparts went straight in his second season on a 450, and then, of course, won the World Championship. And he was the first of a couple of riders who went straight into Michele Rinaldi's team and had an amazing first impact. Stephen Frossard was another one. Romain Febvre, of course, just added into that sort of little queue of riders who somehow just managed to sort of jump into the Palma-based team and have, a degree of success. But, it didn't happen for Deruva, who actually was riding for Honda in 2008 as HRC slowly started to creep back into the sport with some backing. Deruva was riding for the Martin Honda squad based in Italy. And then Billy McKenzie was riding for Cass Honda, who also had, a degree of support from the Japanese as well.
So from a couple of things on that, if you haven't already, you should definitely read Mark Deruva's book called Open. The way that he describes the 2007 fallout with Rinaldi is really quite brutally honest and eye-opening for someone like me who obviously wasn't in the paddock. So that's a superb read on that. Deruva was one of the people who reached out about 2008 and said there's too much to say. But what I do remember distinctly Deruva telling me so many times is the 2008 Honda was the best bike he ever rode and just superb. So that, I think that the 2008 Honda lives in history for that reason. And also that's even mentioned in America and all sorts, actually.
Yeah, I think McKenzie was also pretty fast on it. But then, if I remember rightly, Billy had a dislocated thumb, or he had like a thumb injury that kind of meant that his season was a bit patchy. But, he wasn't slow on that bike.
And also, I remember Billy McKenzie's 2008 Cass Honda as being the best looking bike I've ever seen in my life. Again, that lives with me. Like, nothing will ever knock that off the top spot. Maybe nostalgia.
I know. I think in 2008, you had Yamahas had the crown because Tony Cairoli and No. I'm talking about the Kali
Oh,
Yamahas,
okay.
Cairoli's one. I think it was Red Bull branded, so it kind of looked like a sort of Superman bike. It was a lot of red, white, and blue. It looked really cool. So I think that one sort of takes the nod, and then Tanner Leok as well got on the bike. I think 2000, the following season. No, anyway, yeah, you had the black Monster Energy Yamahas, the factory ones in the Premier class, and then I think in 2008 you had Cairoli already sort of wearing that kind of Red Bull livery and looked cool on the Japanese bike instead of like a KTM.
Yeah,
But
but
one more thing, Lewis, you mentioned Steve Ramon. We should also remind listeners or viewers that 2007 was Suzuki's last World Championship in motocross, the Motocross World Championship. And it was, like you say, an unexpected title. And Ramon was, for all of his, I don't want to say faults, but maybe flaws as a racer, his consistency and the high level of performance and skill and everything else that he had, especially technique, meant that he was, I don't think you could write him off as someone who's going to be going for the championship in 2008.
yeah, Ramon won the 2007 season without winning a single Grand Prix. Who would you I'm just trying to think. Who would you liken him to currently? I can't even think of a rider who's so ineffectively effective.
Yeah, goodness.
It's such a weird makeup for a rider to have, even in other sports. Like, again, I think ineffectively effective is maybe the best way to put it. Because even this 2008 season, not to jump ahead, he was, let's see exactly, 14 points down at the end of the season with just, again, one GP win that came in the muddiest race of all time in Spain. So almost repeated history again by effectively just showing up and walking to a world championship. Bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. It shouldn't work.
But also, don't forget that Suzuki at the time, it seems unbelievable now, but like the RMZ 450 was one of the more advanced bikes in the gate. I think they were the first with fuel injection 4 years earlier. Kevin Strybos was arguably the younger and the brighter of the two riders, but they were part of Sylvain Gabour's factory setup, which was incredibly established. I mean, it was one of the best teams in the paddock. I think it was Ben Townley who said that, if he ever came back to Grand Prix racing from America, it would have to be for Sylvain at Suzuki or, nothing else. I mean, that was and eventually ended up riding.
Yeah, poetic now in hindsight.
Yeah, and also don't forget that 2008, I think going into 2009, Suzuki had like sponsorship from Teka, which was like a big electronics firm in Germany. I mean, that was quite a significant outside backer. They were also supporting the championship. And I think it was also in 2008 where Suzuki started to get a little bit more serious with their MX2 program. So Suzuki were a major sort of force in sort of Grand Prix at that time.
One final note on 2007 to set the stage for 2008. I think lost in history a little bit is, yes, Coppins should have won that title, but if Strybos hadn't missed, I believe it's Bulgaria, I'd have to look, he missed one round. It should have been Strybos who picked up the pieces from Coppins and got his one and only world title. So Ramon was actually third in line. Strybos, who was Ramon's teammate in 2007, was, in my uneducated opinion at least, far and away the superior rider. At least
yeah, and also don't forget, and 2007 was pretty destabilizing for the sport because it was the first season outside of the Stefan Everts era. I think you had 7 different winners in the Premier class. You had like David Philipparts as well, who had sort of stepped up from the MX2 class. He was only the second rider that year since the creation of the MX2 and MX1 categories to win in both categories. Ben Townley was the first. Billy McKenzie as well being a winner. Sebastian Porcel, as you mentioned earlier. So there was kind of like this sort of slightly erratic feeling to sort of MXGP once Josh Coppins' injury meant that he was sort of put to the sidelines. And Strybos had been runner-up 2 years in a row. So it was slightly odd to see him jump out of Suzuki for 2008. He had been there for 6 years. I mean, they'd taken him in as a teenager and as a rookie. And you could see the relationship had been souring somewhat. I think he was a little bit resentful towards the end of 2007. But ultimately, his decision to go to CLS Kawasaki, and I think they were running Olin suspension at the time, which was a little bit left field, was a disaster. I think he had an injury or an illness going into the season. And then I think he broke either his leg or his knee, but he just vanished off the scene in 2008.
Yeah, well, so now we can answer another young Lewis question. I don't know where I got this from, but at the time I remember reading somewhere that Suzuki wanted Kevin to stay, but only if he rode in MX2.
Yeah, that was he's also talked about this in a couple of interviews, and like I said, Suzuki were looking more towards the 250. In the end, I think they banked on Pascal Lorette to be the main sort of rider for them there, but he had his own sort of problems.
Yeah, because Swift Suzuki entered in 2008. Was that?
Yeah, I mean, he was
some sort of
he was a talented sort of French rider, but yeah.
But was Swift Suzuki some sort of effort to? I don't really know. Like, because in my mind, Swift Suzuki was just a British team similar to RWJ Honda, like a British team that rides Suzuki happy days. But was that actually meant to be a springboard to something in the future or a development program? Like, it seems weird that Pascal ended up there.
Yeah, I don't remember it ever being part of a strict structure. I mean, the German, the MX2 team that Ken Roxon would eventually come through in 2009, I mean, that was sort of set up, that had Tekka backing, that was like a real deal, and that became part of the factory Suzuki setup. But, and eventually, Suzuki would run MXGP and MX2 teams all the way until the bitter end. Of course, fielding Jeremy Sewer and Hunter Lawrence in their final term. But yeah, it was a little bit loose at that time, Lewis, but you could see that the brand was still strong and it was still kind of expanding. And it was Kevin's decision to get out of it. He was offered the MX2 option, which he didn't fancy. I believe that, Suzuki were also eyeing Kenda Daika. I mean, sort of the powerful Belgian had been riding for Honda. And it was like a decent step up for him to become a factory rider. And yeah, it was ultimately it was just like a real big career snap for Strybos at the time.
Correct this if it's over dramatic, but for context, Suzuki had been grooming Strybos in a similar way to Star grooming Deegan. Like, Strybos was Suzuki's can't miss kid. He was literally nicknamed the kid, which makes it even more bizarre that they would drop him but keep Ramon, who had won significantly less. I believe, was 2007 his first year on a Suzuki? 06 he would have been KTM still, I believe, from memory.
He was Premier Class in 04.
It just makes no...
Ramon.
Honestly, it makes zero sense to me why Suzuki would turn their back on Strybos. And ultimately, this started a bizarre period of Strybos's career where basically he ended up being as low as you can possibly get. It's a miracle that he made it back to where he did. And also returned to Suzuki, of all places, down the line. Bizarre.
But I think Kevin said that, leaving Suzuki for 2008 was probably the biggest mistake of his career. But I mean, it was... Yes, obviously, but going to MX2 would have not been a great decision either, I don't think. So he's kind of not got a choice. He obviously... I mean, he was still young as well. I mean, the way he was acting, or perhaps he was collaborating with the team through 2007, and the frustrations he had put him in a position where he was given, take this option or get out.
Okay, I'm going to text him. I'm going to text him right now and say, "Were you an asshole to Suzuki in 2007?" So stay tuned.
I'd like to see what he says. But don't forget as well, Lewis, that Suzuki also had Clement Desal, who was only, I think, 20 years old at the time, riding a two-stroke in the Premier Class.
Yeah, so, and Desal came from the same school of thought as Strybos, right? Where basically we're not doing MX2, we're just going straight to MXGP, MX1. That was to be honest, that kind of lived and died with Strybos and Desal, didn't it? I can't think of another example.
Like I was saying earlier, Suzuki is pretty much the team and the bike that everybody wanted. And, don't forget, Sylvain Gabors was not afraid to take bold decisions. He kicked out Michael Pichon in favor of Joel Smets, who came across from KTM because they wanted to develop the 450 even more. And then when Smets had his injury problems and he was really in the twilight of his career, they decided to pick up Stephen Ramon, who was, who can we say, he's kind of like the Maxime Renault of current he's kind of like a world champion already and someone who's very much coming up. And if anything, Suzuki did lean heavily towards Belgian riders. I mean, Smets, Strybos, Ramon, De Salle. I think they even had sort of Manuel Prim sort of doing some fill-in rides, if I remember correctly. I might be mistaken with that one. But Belgium was also the dominant force at the time in World Championship motocross.
You've just reminded me of a very funny story that I'm sure I've told on this podcast before. But speaking of Smets and Suzuki, in 2005, when a rider withdrew from a race, the graphic on TV came up saying retired. So it came up halfway through the race saying retired, Joel Smets. And let me tell you, young Lewis freaked out because I was like, Joel Smets has just retired in the middle of a race. He's just ended his career. We're in Portugal. It was Portugal, I remember. We're in Portugal and he's just ended his career. I remember calling my dad in and being like, Smets has retired. Like, it stuck with me, but again, because it rocked my world that this incredible rider had just decided to cancel his career halfway through Moto 1 of Portugal. Funny.
There's some good interviews with Joel Smets as well about his time at Suzuki, and he underlines the fact that it was an opportunity, working with the Japanese and that kind of support structure that you just don't turn down. So going into 2008, Suzuki, I would say, is probably forget sort of Red Bull KTM, Suzuki and Yamaha, that was really like the big rivalry.
I guess one more switch that I wanted to clarify. Why did Billy Mackenzie only last one season at Kawasaki? Because they replaced him with Manuel Priem, who was... I will stand on a soapbox and say Manuel Priem was an extremely underrated rider and actually very, very good. But he was in no way, in my opinion, a clear choice over Billy Mackenzie, GP winner in year one.
Well, don't forget Kawasaki were also in transition. I mean, Jan de Groot sadly passed away, I think in 2007. Billy had been the first British rider to win in the Premier class on a 450 with that success in Japan. And it was actually the first win for the bike when Kawasaki had made an investment in Tano Leok. I think it was a 2 or 3 year contract. And I don't think Leok ever won in a Kawasaki.
No, Leok won in 2008. He won the Irish GP, I think.
Was it on Kawasaki or Yamaha?
Kawasaki, 2009 he was Dakali.
Right, okay.
Kawasaki in 2008 was Leok and Priem, which again, Leok and Priem, that's not a superb lineup for a full factory team.
Yeah, I know. I mean, Kawasaki did a lot to try and keep Billy. And I remember working around the Belgian Grand Prix in Namur and actually sort of talking with him a lot in his motorhome, the pros and cons, as well as his dad, what he should do. I mean, he had 2 contracts on the table, one from CAS Honda that promised factory support, and then another one from factory Kawasaki to continue in green. And it really was like a toss-up about which one he should do. He was and in the end, I think it was just the possibility of keeping based in the UK and also having some pretty decent terms, from the British Honda team that made him stay that way. I think if you ask him, though, I mean, if you got him on a podcast or you got him in an interview and said, if you could go back, would you stay at Kawasaki another year? I think he probably would have said, yeah, I should have stayed one more year there. But it was... in 2008, he was still one of the leading riders in the Premier class, regardless of whether it was green or red.
Just like to pause to say, I am loving this. I am in my absolute element. So I'm back to the podcast. There was one more thing I wanted to clarify. Well, actually, I wanted to just set the stage a little bit more. We've discussed this, but between the Everts era, which ended in 2006, and the Caroli era, which started in 2009, 450-wise, MXGP was a little bit lost, as you said, and I think that's why people don't remember this year so well. Even before we did this podcast, I was just looking through the standings, and I'll pull it up now so I don't get it wrong, but Max Nagel finished 6th in the championship and was 64 points down on a champion. 68 points covering the top 6 is phenomenal, unheard of, apart from, even 2021 can't live up to that. But I think, you look at the list of GP winners in 2008, Coppins, incredible. Nagel, Philipparts, Barragan, Dodika, Seb Porcel, Leoc, Deruva, Ramon. Aside from Deruva, Coppins, those aren't huge personalities that are still celebrated to this day. They're all kind of just, I don't know how you describe them, discreet riders, mellow riders. I don't know. I think part of the reason this era gets forgotten is there wasn't a personality to kind of carry it in the same way that Jeffrey, Prado, Tony have done.
Yeah, but also it comes down to that age-old argument: is it better to have a lot of parity and riders, have a real close championship where anyone can win it, or is it better to have one or two, three leading, outstanding riders that just create this this veil of supremacy and dominance, and ultimately makes you respect the capabilities of the athlete that much more? It's some people would say I definitely prefer this way, and other people prefer to see the excellence. So it's it's definitely like an overshadowing arc for any bench racing narrative.
Update from Kevin. No, I wasn't an arsehole. Next message. Well, I was at the end because somebody didn't treat me honestly at the time.
Oh, there you go.
I'd be really...
There was dissent. There was dissent amongst the ranks. That's what I remember. He wasn't happy in Suzuki.
Okay, I'm going to ask him one more question and then we'll get on with the podcast. But because he went to GPKR Kawasaki, which was essentially Team Porcel, which explain to me why Team Porcel had their own team. I mean, they are the Porcels, so very weird, but why was that a thing?
I said it was CLS earlier, which was wrong. It was, I want to say Patrick Gillette, who was like a big Kawasaki dealer, and he had previously kind of aligned with Jan de Groot and the factory team, so there was some kind of synergy there, and it was a way for Christophe Porcel, who was very much, this blazing talent coming through Grand Prix racing. Him, Tommy Searle, Ken Roxon. There was definitely like this sort of movement going on for a period of about 3 to 4 years in Grand Prix, and Marvin Musquin as well, of course. He was just a very well established, and it was quite a well organized Kawasaki satellite team, and the Porcel brothers had enough attention and profile around them to make it sort of look, extremely well organized and well supported. They were using UFO gear for the most part, I think, and Seb Porcel, who was an efficient and decent rider in MX2, but when he jumped on the 450, he was surprisingly quick. I think he won a couple of races in 2007. I seem to remember him dominating at Faenza, the Italian Grand Prix, when it was ridiculously hot.
And didn't 2007 Faenza, Seb won MX1 and Christoph won MX2 same day?
Yeah, there you go. The brothers. I mean, was that the first time it had been done, I think?
Had to have been, doesn't it? Who else?
Yeah. Well, I remember Georges Aubé, the late Georges Aubé, who had been sort of Rebel KTM team manager briefly. I mean, he was waxing lyrical about Seb Porcel. I mean, he really, really wanted to sign him to be a factory KTM rider. But, the bond and the setup that the brothers had, I guess you could draw comparisons to the Coonan brothers in that they kind of wanted to sort of stick together and be very much part of their own unit within a unit. Then that was the situation with the Porcels at Kawasaki.
Final update from Kevin. I said, "Did you have what other offers did you have for 2008?" He said, "Cass Honda. I tested the bike and it was great. Just got scared about all of the rumours from payments because, as I found out later in the day, so again for context, as a young fan, Cass Honda was my team. I just loved that team for whatever reason, mainly I guess because Coppins was on it to begin with, but that lived with me even once Coppins left. And then I remember Lommel one year, I was talking to Roger Harvey and was like, just tell me stories about Cass Honda. I just want to know. And he was like, well, they never paid people. And I was like, I don't want to know this. So I wasn't even aware of this. I just thought Cass Honda was a great team. But Strybos says the rumours about them not paying people scared him off. And he actually said...
I think...
his final contribution to this podcast. Not sure if the format of interviewing riders over WhatsApp mid-podcast is going to take off, to be honest, but hey-ho. He said, I mean, I really did like the team manager from GPKR, Patrick Gallardo. He was and is always very kind to me. I had a good connection with him. So although GPKR went terribly for Kevin, we like Patrick. So there's that.
Yes. CS Honda, Cass Honda was, I want to say, God knows the name is forgetting me now. I want to say Harry Ainsworth.
Yes, Harry Ainsworth. Yep.
Yeah. The owner, sort of manager. I mean, you have to remember that as a team that went from being Gordon Crockard and his mechanic driving around Europe in a small bus and winning 250cc Grand Prix against sort of the likes of Michael Pichon, Frederic Bolle, and whatever else, to this huge Honda-backed team where they were entertaining Yoshi Atsuta from Japan. They had Josh Coppins, who was again one of the main riders in the category. They had the likes of Evgeny Bobryshev as well. I mean, they were just a bit of a chaotic team. And actually, getting paid was one of Billy's main worries. But what made him actually go to Honda was the fact that Honda underwrote the deal. I mean, in effect, he would be getting the money straight from the factory, and it wouldn't be going through CAS. The bonuses, I think, were another thing. I don't know if Billy ever did get them, but he had his base salary from Honda, so that's why he plumped for it.
I want to give this podcast all the awards. Honestly, this is everything
Have you got a read
to me.
To do yet?
I know. I want to nominate us for an award. I have so many questions. I want to know so much. Okay, so this is now this is completely off of 2008, but. So I didn't realize that was CAS Honda's beginnings. It basically sounds like, in a way, SS24 currently is the modern day CAS Honda, because that also started as Sean and his dad. But I never knew that. I just thought CAS Honda was this prominent team. So why did Coppins end up there?
If SS24, if you want to draw a comparison there, then they would have to suddenly have huge factory support from KTM, and just go much bigger in terms of the resources that they have.
Okay.
Which is hard to kind of imagine with the current climate and state surrounding KTM. But yeah.
But why did Coppins end up on CAS Honda? Because in my humble opinion, not biased at all, Coppins, based on now what I've learned as time's gone on, that CAS Honda was not the team that I presumed it was, I feel like Coppins should have been on a much better team than CAS Honda.
Yeah, I remember HRC largely didn't exist in motocross then. Honda and Moto Europe supported, various teams. A bit smaller Honda, Josh was riding for them after leaving Suzuki in 2002, I think. And then he got injured quite severely in 2003, which might have been his first season with CAS Honda. But, he had the link from Honda from that sort of defunct Italian setup where he was teammate to Pit Byrer, I believe. So, yeah, that was just the case. I think he carried on being a Honda rider, and that meant, when Bismara evaporated, it just kind of absorbed to him going into CAS, which was the most logical step.
I wonder if you asked Roger Harvey, like, do you regret not being in a position to kind of give Coppins more of what he deserved or hold on to him, or, because in a sense, it kind of sounds to me like Coppins and Honda was right. What's the saying? Right partnership, wrong time. Like Honda weren't in a position to kind of utilize Coppins in the way that they could have or should have. I don't know.
But then, so much of sport is about the right athlete with the right environment at the right time, isn't it? I mean, Coppins and Yamaha in 2007 should have been. I mean, the fact that he didn't win that world championship is still staggering to this day.
You don't need to tell me, Adam. You don't need to tell me. Let me tell you about Polosport. What I actually wanted to do was go back in time and see what each of our partners were doing in 2008, but I ran out of time to do that, so I haven't done it. But Polosport. Hey, Yamaha YZ125 or 250 riders, maybe this applies to Antonio Caroli, who was a YZ 250 rider in 2008. This one's, four-stroke, close enough. This one's for you. If you've been riding models from 2002 to 2021, 2008 is in that range, people. Listen up, because Polosport has something that's going to make your heart race. They are introducing a new restyling kit, a complete transformation for your Yamaha, giving your bike a 2024 look without any complicated modifications. The kit includes everything you need: a new gas tank, a full race seat, an airbox, all designed to fit seamlessly. No fuss, no hassle. Polosport has what you need. Thank you to Polosport, All Balls Racing, and EVS Sports. Right, on to 2008. So, I don't really know where to begin.
Well, first some context, right? It was 15 Grand Prix that season. and you're at a point where I'm trying to remember which Grand Prix it was, but Ustream had a big press conference where they said in 3 to 5 years' time, this World Championship will be spreading to 18 rounds, and 3 to 5 of the events will be held overseas. They had reached a point, I think, I mean, we're right on the edge of the financial crisis as well. That happened in 2009, but the sport was in still pretty good health. I think Ustream employed like another 10 people for the championship, either at the end of 2008 or going into 2009, and they had reached also a stage where 50% of the calendar was backed by government money. So, even though it was a pretty poor scenario for the manufacturers, I think, for example, due to the high strength of the yen, and also what was going on in the economic sort of landscape around the world, they were producing something like 40% less motorcycles for 2009. So you're right on this sort of precipice, really, of the sport being in pretty rude health, but then going to like a load of cutbacks in 2009. But yeah, Lewis, I mean, it was a pretty reduced championship. From those 15 rounds, there was only one overseas, which is still the last Grand Prix we've had in South Africa, in Nelspruit, in the natural park that they have there.
And was Nelspruit one and Bulgaria? Done?
It was one and done, yeah. And it was actually a pretty pokey circuit. I mean, it was also held at a time of year, I think it was in the latter phase of the championship, because that was also the scene where Tony Cairoli had his first sort of major injury of his career with a broken left knee. But the sun was setting like dangerously low by the time of the second motos. The riders were really complaining because going over the jumps, they couldn't see anything in the sunlight. So yeah, you had, that kind of setup really. It was the first ever Women's World Championship. They were present at 5 of the Grand Prix. And for those who went to the British Grand Prix at Mallory Park, you had that bizarre hybrid event where you had a temporarily constructed motocross circuit over parts of the spectator zone adjacent to the asphalt, and then a supermoto track as well, as sort of part of the whole event schedule. So it was a little bit kind of, there was some weird stuff going on.
Why did we not go to Sun City in 2008? What happened to that track?
Sun City, did that run for 2 or 3 years? But that was like another purpose-built circuit in the car park.
Maybe that wasn't around in 07. Maybe that stopped before then. 04, 05 definitely. Because 05, who can forget? Yeah. We're not talking about 05, but who can forget Everts pointing to the crowd on the last lap, crashing, and who came through to save the day? Josh Coppins.
Yeah. Is that also the one where he was forced off the track by Mikel Pichon, and then, he threw his goggles at him?
That was 04.
Yeah, and there was a rider boycott as well.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, they I'm sure we talked about this on a podcast before, but the whistle went to shepherd them out of the waiting area into the gate, and none of the riders moved.
Why?
The idea was because it was a complaint over the way that, prize money was being cut, the way that the teams are being treated. And so when no riders moved, it looked a bit weird on the TV coverage, which was being beamed live, that the gate was suddenly empty and there were minutes away from the gate being dropped.
You know what?
So that was interesting.
I think I remember watching that, but I think I was so young that I didn't really put to it. Like, it didn't seem so weird to me, but I seem to remember thinking, this is taking a long time.
Well, I wasn't actually kind of in the gate, but the rumor has it that sort of Giuseppe Longo, the Ustream president at the time, had to charge down and say, what the hell's going on? Why is there no riders in the gate about to start this moto? And I think, they largely, the FIM and Ustream, threw the book at Stefan Everts, and Mikel Pichon. I mean, I think when Everts had his indiscretion on the track by kind of wanting to upset Pichon, that was sort of their way of punishing him with a sort of suspended sentence, if you like, or it was. I have to go back and have a look because I didn't look at those races. It was more just 2008.
Yeah, and you know what? I've already decided we're doing other years. I mean, you know what? I could not care less about 2025. When it comes time to talk about Argentina, we'll be here Monday after the race and discussing 2011. So that's...
you would have been raised and burnt as some eternal pariah in South Africa over that boycott compared to what happened with you in 2008.
Well,
so luckily you weren't there.
That is kind of like a good perspective of the difference in media landscape because of what was available to do in that time, writing essentially. It was more sophisticated, I guess, in the way it's handled. Whereas now, when you can do podcasts and social media, it's almost impossible for that to come across in a measured way. It's all going to filter out real time and be dramatized and become quite horrific, as we saw in our name.
And also, you need to get someone on the record who can speak concisely and reasonably about this subject, and to be able to record it all efficiently and fairly by painting both sides of the story. I mean, it wasn't something you could do in 5 minutes. You actually had to sort of rummage around and get the information and get the gossip and the plans and whatever else. So it wasn't that easy. And it's also worth remembering that 2008 in sort of the Motocross World Championship was actually still a pretty turbulent time. I think Ustream were only, there were, in 2009 was when they introduced their €10,000 per rider kind of licensing fee. And when they first had official entry lists for the first time, where they kind of started to shape MXGP as we know it now. So it was kind of moving away from let's fill the gate with all sorts of riders and all sorts of privateers. And it took a lot for the paddock to get used to that. I think as 2008, you still could exist. You still could make an impact as a privateer. I mean, someone like Clement de Saux is an example. He was troubling the top 15, sometimes the top 10 on a two-stroke, just through his talent and being able to turn up to Grand Prix races with his dad. I mean, that's something that just couldn't happen now.
Yeah, funny because it is only 16 years ago, but almost a lifetime ago as far as the differences. So to kind of jump back 30 minutes ago, Coppins entered 2008 as the undoubted favourite.
Yeah.
From memory, he had a toe injury 2 weeks before the first round.
2 toes. I don't know where he crashed. I can't remember. I think it might have been in the Netherlands. I remember getting a call from Yamaha while I was kind of on holiday, and they said, bad news. And I was like, what's happened? They said, Coppins has broken his foot. You need to make a press release. So I remember calling Josh and trying to get some details, but basically he'd smashed his foot, and to the degree where the bones were sticking out the top of 2 toes, and he was then in a rush to try and be fit for the first round in Valkenswaard in the Netherlands. And I think things moved from bad to worse because he managed to get into the gate, but then him and Phillips crashed together in that first Grand Prix. So it was a little bit of a rocky start for the teammates, and also for that first Grand Prix of the World Championship. I think Coppins may have finished sort of top 6 or top 7, but also Phillips was, a rider, young, showed himself to be capable. I think people had a lot of questions over whether he could be a factory rider and fit well into that environment. But I remember interviewing him at the beginning of 2008, and he said that when Michele Rinaldi sort of walked across the living area and said, David, can I have a talk with you? He was like, I'll sign now. You don't need to ask me anything else. To be able to ride for Michele Rinaldi's sort of factory Yamaha team was, I think, a pretty big dream for any Italian riders. So, Phillips just sort of jumped feet first into the whole thing.
So despite the pre-season injury and all that came from that, Coppins, when we left Germany, which was I think I wrote it down, round 8, he was only 4 points down in the championship. So I have no idea. Why did it fall apart after that? Because in my mind, weathered the storm of the injury, the pre-season injury, to make it through the first half of the season, as we've seen Jeffrey Hurlings figure out many times, and then in pole position to capitalise in the second half and finally get this long overdue championship. But for whatever reason, from round 8 in Germany on, the form noticeably drops, and Coppins was kind of rendered irrelevant, and I have no idea why.
Was it round 8?
Germany, I think so.
I'm trying to remember if he actually got hurt again.
Yeah, Germany was round 8.
Was it a concussion?
So Germany, he went 1-1. So he won Germany.
That was his only win.
Yeah,
I think it might be one of his only wins that season.
Yeah, it was his one win. So France round 7, he went 2-2. Germany round 8, he went 1-1. So I'd imagine at the time everyone's like, here we go. Coppins from 2007 is back. Everyone's screwed. But then from Germany on, he went 13.5, 9.4, 5.8, 7.10, 9 DNF. You know, like, just gone. It's gone. So something must have happened between Germany and Sweden. And young Lewis is probably in pieces.
He had tangles with riders. I mean, in Sweden, I think he went down. And then I'm trying to remember, I think South Africa, he had a crash with Porcel. There were a couple of like in moto incidents, but like you say, I mean, he was still flying. I think he renewed his contract again to ride for Yamaha for 2009 around about that time. So yeah, I think it was bizarre. It just seemed like Philip Arts had the momentum, and then Coppins was struggling. But if you come into the season, behind the 8 ball with a broken foot, then I guess you're always going to be catching up a little bit.
In hindsight, and this is the first time this has ever crossed my mind. In hindsight, bizarre that Coppins renewed for only 1 year after what had mostly been a very successful start to the relationship. A 1-year contract after that is weird from both sides. I would think that Coppins would demand more, and Yamaha would be like, "You are still our world champion in 09, 10, 11." But then maybe because of Caroli coming, they were like, that Yamaha thing is, but then he was only Yamaha for 1 year, so they must have seen the writing on the wall there. Or maybe, this is full conspiracy theory, maybe Yamaha only renewed Coppins for 1 year because they were like, we need to show Caroli that he's our guy and we're serious. So we'll get Coppins for 1 more year in his rookie year, and then we can say to Caroli, he's out, you're our guy. Who knows?
That's possible, but Yamaha at the time were split between Decali, which was Cairoli, and then also Rinaldi, which was also YRD, and also the whole union with Yamaha in Japan. They were developing race kit parts and everything else. So it was, I think the idea of Cairoli moving across to be part of Rinaldi was something that was never going to happen. But I think Josh just signed another year just due to his age, and also the fact that they sort of had Philip Arts, who quickly became, I don't want to say the number 1 rider in the team, because I know Josh was really, really highly rated for his conduct, the way he was, the way he developed the bike, his professionalism. But I think, just missing out in 2007, that was really the ultimate sweet spot. I think riders, when they sign a factory deal, maybe get like a 2 to 3 year window, whereas Josh really only had that sort of year and a half, and that pre-season injury in 2008, I think it's too harsh to say was the beginning of the slippery slope, but it didn't do him any favors.
Yeah, nail in the coffin, maybe. And some of us have never been the same since. So how surprising was it that Philip Arts won this championship? Like, were people just losing their minds in the paddock? Like, this is unbelievable? Because even looking back, maybe it's just because he won the championship. I was surprised to see he only won 2 GPs that season. Because in my mind, I'm like, he won the championship. He must have been somewhat of a dominant regular force. But no, not at all. 2 GP wins.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, at the time, you have to, like you pointed out, Steve Ramon had been world champion without a Grand Prix win. So you knew that he wasn't a rider who was going to rip off like 3 or 4 wins in a row. So Philip Arts really just had to establish like a similar level of performance. He won Grand Prix. I remember him having a very tough race in the Grand Prix of France. And then there was a Grand Prix towards the end of the season in the sand where he, finished 4th or something. It was way beyond expectations and managed to keep sort of Ramon in check. I mean, that was basically underlined his, his title credentials before going to Italy for the season finale. But the thing is, though, it's this thing, maybe we didn't appreciate it enough at the time, but Philip Arts, he had pretty limited English, but he was a very spiky character. And he didn't have a problem, getting tough with people or riding aggressively. And when you have like kind of a meek character like Steve Ramon, and you have this fiery character like David Philip Arts, and then you throw a couple of other people in the middle as well, it was quite a dramatic mix. You kind of definitely fell in one camp or the other. I think there were people sort of willing the rookie edginess of Philip Arts and that sort of black Yamaha to do something. Whereas, Ramon on the Suzuki, there was still this kind of feeling that he had lucked the championship a little bit. And there wasn't really enough of a consistent threat from anywhere else. And KTM was still trying to sort themselves out. Max Nagel was a phenomenal starter on that bike, but it still wasn't anything like the sort of the 450 SXF that we came to sort of appreciate maybe sort of 5 years later. I mean, KTM had to build a 350 before they could even, and also sign like the upcoming rider in the World Championship to actually make an impact.
So Phillips won the championship by 14 points, but just 5 points further back, and again, this surprised me, came Dodika. But I, as a fan, do not recall ever factoring Dodika in as a potential title threat. What's your memory of that?
Yeah, he was just too flaky. I mean, he was too inconsistent. That was the thing. Big Ken could sort of pull that bike around, but then he was tagged as well with a little bit of the reputation as someone who didn't want to work. His whole sort of character and demeanor was, somebody that had talent and had strength, but just didn't have the same Everts-esque work ethic. And he was kind of inspirational in weird ways, but not. I mean, Suzuki had such a bizarre kind of combination with Ramon and the technique and this sort of very subtle character, and then sort of Dodika, who was kind of like the opposite. It was very barreling and sort of polemic. And, I never really thought Dodika was world championship material. It was always going to be like a race winner. And just, he won on the Yamaha. He moved across to a Monster Energy Yamaha in 2009, I think, and won a Grand Prix. I think it was at Tuchenthal. But I'm surprised as well that Dodika was that close. But I mean, Phillips went into that final Grand Prix in Faenza. The weather was terrible. It was super muddy. He needed to finish. I think he finished third in the first moto, which was tense enough as it is, and you could feel the tension thick with sort of all the fans sort of piling into that small circuit that's now owned by Andrea Dovizioso and has been completely overhauled. And then in the second moto, he had Dodika sort of roaming around trying to help Ramon for once. And I can remember him just giving the Suzukis a really wide berth. And when they were together on the track, it was like, well, this could get really close, because all they had to do was put Phillips into the crowd, and it was over.
I'd just like to pull a what do you call it? Public notice. We're not getting to MX2. I've just realised that we haven't even touched that. We're not going to make it.
We have to. There's a couple of little snippets of MX2.
Okay, let's try and wrap MXGP up and then shoehorn. It would only be in true us fashion to shoehorn MX2 in, even on a cold December, talking about 2008. I had a lot of questions. Sorry, go on.
Oh, go on. No, I want to mention Jonathan Barragan first.
Well, I was just going to say, I had a lot of questions from people saying they don't remember Barragan being that good. And if memory serves me right, at that time he was on a Silver Action KTM, not factory. Funny, actually, thinking about it, he was basically Nagel just a year behind. Nagel impressed on a Sarholz KTM 07, got a factory ride. Barragan impressed on Silver Action 08, got a weird. But yeah, lots of fans, surprising number, said they don't remember Barragan being that good. So discuss.
Yeah, but he won 4 Grand Prix that year.
More than anyone else.
And he was getting a lot of support. I mean, KTM Spain was a burgeoning market for the manufacturer at the time. So the fact that they had a Spanish rider, and Barragan sort of set numerous milestones. I mean, he was the first Spaniard, I think, to win in Grand Prix racing in the Premier Class. He was the first Spaniard to win his home Grand Prix when he won at Belpuig. And, he was, again, one of these riders. It's kind of like Tano Leok, maybe 3 or 4 years beforehand, where you thought, right, okay, here's one of the leading lights coming up. There was that kind of fuss surrounding him, a fuss or just the rumors or just sort of malicious gossip that, he was indulging in some substances, but it was never proven. Yeah, he got to the point where I think it was at Lommel where, even a journalist felt obliged to ask the FIM during a press conference about the rumors surrounding it, because there was a lot of it going on in cycling, and it was quite a pertinent subject in Belgian media at the time. And Barragan was based in Lommel, and he was having success somewhat against the grain, somewhat unexpectedly. But I think it was just a case of a rider knowing the motorcycle extremely well. His riding style fit the heavy torque that was there with the KTM. Maybe he was doing something, maybe he wasn't, but it seemed unlikely at the time, because there still was like a doping, anti-doping program or a doping testing program going on. But yeah, I mean, it's not a subject really to get into, or we can't without sort of definitive verdicts. But he tested clean, he was okay, and he achieved a success, and then signed a factory Kawasaki contract.
Putting Philip Arts and Barragan in the same category. Philip Arts is a world champion. Barragan never got to that level, but many wins and winningest rider in 2008, for instance. Do you look back and think those riders are underrated, or do you think it was more a case of they weren't that good, they just happened to fall in this very unique period where we were between eras and there wasn't that guy?
I think, Philip Arts was better than Barragan. I mean, Barragan really, like I said, just made the most of the KTM at the time. I don't think he really had the race smarts to be able to, be consistent for a long period. And when he crashed, he hurt himself. I mean, that was the case of Kawasaki. I think he dislocated his hip. He had been a big investment for them going into 2009, I think. And we couldn't really understand it, in the paddock. I mean, we thought if you're going to spend big on a rider, then Barragan wasn't really the one. Whereas Philip Arts has had a little bit more of a strategic nuance about him, I think. And I know the other riders really respected his strength and his capabilities to do stuff on the motorcycle. And, he had a pretty long career. I mean, he was even shining as a wild card rider at Majora not so long ago.
We are getting breaking MXGP news in 5 minutes, I've just been told. So what perfect time to be recording a podcast. Not sure if this is relating to 2008 or not. Maybe we're going to get the Barragan scandal answered. PR coming. What else from 2008? I've kind of lost. I feel like we need to move on to MX2 now.
Yeah.
Barragan underrated. Nagel was kind of the start of Nagel. Ramon 1 GP win, disappointing, very overrated rider. Deruva 2 GP wins, that lost a little bit. We had a lot of questions about the Irish GP, which was, I don't know where, but it was held on Woodchip and one and done. So tell us about that.
I remember at the time, I mean, you had Johnny Douglas Hamilton, who for me is still the best track designer I've seen for motocross circuits, not just for Grand Prix. I mean, we're talking about the guy who is one half of the talent behind Gore Basin on the Isle of Wight. He also built the track at Sun City in South Africa, Matterley Basin. I think he had a bit to do with Franciacorta as well for the Motocross of the Nations. Anyway, I remember him telling me that Red Bull had come to him and said, look, we want to do sort of these motocross signature events. And they had one idea of building a track and running a race at the Aintree horse racing facility. And for people who, are not from the UK, then Aintree is quite famous for being the site of the Grand National, I believe, the most prestigious horse racing event, I think, in the world, or certainly in the UK. So, Red Bull were at the point where they wanted to do these zany things, which now we sort of come to expect from them. But in 2008, 2009, it was still kind of interesting the way they wanted to leverage motocross, I guess you could say. And he was making Grand Prix circuits, and it was very strange to go to a horse racing site in Dublin, or just outside of Dublin in Ireland, and find this impromptu track, which is exactly how you'd imagine a man-made track in the middle of a horse racing venue to look like. In other words, incredibly flat, very featureless, nothing much about it. And the fact that it pissed with rain meant they had to throw a load of wood chip down, and it was just a bit of a farce of a Grand Prix. I don't remember there being too many fans. Paddock was miles away because they were using the permanent sort of hard standing facilities of the horse racing, locale. And it was just a really, really bizarre Grand Prix. I have memories of Zach Osborne racing there and not doing too badly.
Well, we have a question from a Zacco15 asking us who won the first moto in Ireland in 2008. I'm not going to look it up, but I presume it was him.
Well, there you go. I think that was his first win, but I can remember everyone just being slightly bemused that, this Grand Prix was happening. Now I think you'd look at it and think, wow, what a wacky interpretation of a Grand Prix, and you cannot fault the ambition. But it was around the time when I think, that the Irish government, in Northern Ireland, we had a couple of Grand Prix as well, kind of expensively assembled temporary tracks But yeah, it was like Mallory Park as well, and the British Grand Prix just being on this sort of temporary circuit surrounded by funfair and around the Supermoto World Championship. Promoters were just trying different stuff, and ultimately it wouldn't sort of really work.
I didn't know any of this, but in a weird way, I kind of feel like maybe Red Bull was ahead of its... I mean, Red Bull is ahead of its time, but I feel like that concept with MXGP specifically would be much better suited now or in the last 6 years, and it's a shame that it happened so early because I doubt they'll come back and do it again, especially with a Monster Link, obviously. Yeah, sounds weird. I had no idea, but it sounds ahead of its time.
Well, it wasn't like a Red Bull back Grand Prix. I think Red Bull were present in MXGP then, but it was just to give people an idea of the feeling that was around motocross at the time. There were activities and kind of incentives to do things differently, and that was why we ended up racing a Grand Prix in the middle of a horse racing venue in Ireland.
Were there horse racing things going on the same weekend, or no? No.
I mean, but you had to pass through the horse racing.
Oh, okay.
Circuit to get to the motocross circuit. So it was just slightly strange that it was all placed there.
Before we transition to MX2, a very famous moment, which I don't think many people know about, or maybe new MXGP fans. Speaking of Red Bull, in 2010, the Red Bull arch at Glen Helen deflated mid-moto and landed on Christophe Charlier. So, yeah, I feel like that's one of those things that will never happen again and should be talked about more, because what a hilarious thing to happen. And also, I don't really remember there being I feel like something serious should have come of that, and I just kind of remember, from my perspective as a fan, everyone just being like, shit happens.
Yeah, that's why we said at the time, if a Red Bull bridge deflates and hits a rider and nobody's there to see it, then did it really happen?
Or you could say, if a Red Bull bridge deflates and hits a rider, if it's Christophe Charlier, then did it really hit a rider? That was harsh. Point being, Christophe Charlier is not the type of rider that everyone's going to kick off a fuss about. If it was Caroli, you would have heard.
2008, he was the man. He was the European champion, and he was the rider that everybody wanted to sign going to MX2.
Yeah, he beat Roxon and Hurlings, didn't he? It was the EMX podium every week was Charlier, Roxon, Hurlings in that order.
Well, maybe Anstey as well. Was he in the championship at that point, or was he in the US by? I'm not sure. But yeah, he beat everyone.
That was 2009, the Charlier EMX year. 2000.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, 2008 was won by Valentin Telea.
Yeah.
But
he was a future Suzuki rider.
As we do transition to MX2, I did have an EMX2 segment for us. In 20th place, friend of the podcast, Rasmus Jorgensen. And I reached out to Rasmus for an update. And Rasmus said, "Wow, that's a long time ago. I must have been 16. As I remember, 2008 was actually my worst year with no progress and lots of injuries. 2007, I was 15 and podiumed my first ever EMX 250. Rasmus Jorgensen, everyone. Well done.
There you go. What happened in 2008?
I guess injuries and stuff.
Distractions. Getting distracted by a 16-year-old is
he also
been
said,
known to happen.
I actually didn't read the second message. He said he went to California with Suzuki in January with Roxon. So, Rasmus just living the high life, really in the scene.
My memory of him is being a Suzuki rider, but then just not really, being one of those guys who looks good, but it never really happened for him.
Yeah, he bled Suzuki in the same way that Roxon did, is my understanding. Like, Roxon and Rasmus were Suzuki's guys. I'm just trying. The MXGP website has crashed. I don't know why. Probably because the servers are like, why are people clicking the 2008 results so viciously? So MX2, Tyler Rattray won, narrowly beat out Tommy Searle. It was a three-way battle. Antonio Caroli was in that, withdrew mid-season with a torn ACL. Go.
Well, Cairoli had won, 10, 14 GPs in 07, so he was the man. I don't think anyone was really talking about him moving up to the Premier class, though, in 2008. And then, like we mentioned earlier, he looked awesome on that Yamaha, and then just said goodbye to his knee at the South African Grand Prix. I remember writing at the time that was the first time Cairoli had not picked up any points in 65 GPs. So I was very firmly in Lewis Phillips mode, and I was trying to dig up statistics that nobody cared about.
I just thought to myself, you sound like a young Lewis Phillips.
There you go. But to have him sort of removed from MX2 was a big shock. I mean, he was the main man, but we can't forget the Red Bull KTM. While they didn't have so much presence in the Premier class, and Barragan got a factory bike because of the injury problems for Max Nagel. I can't even remember who Nagel's teammate was in the Premier class. It might have been Kenneth Gunderson, perhaps.
I want to say he didn't have one, but that wouldn't make sense. You know what? I'm going to figure that out. But if I
you look that up while I talk. But so Red Bull KTM and MX2. You're just coming. I don't think it was the case anymore. But Champ KTM and Kees van der Ven have been running the MX2 program for KTM. But they had Tyler Rattray, of course, Tommy Searle, who had been World Championship runner-up the previous season. It was only his third year as a pro, Searle, and he was pretty much on the way. But he was already bound for the AMA and the US. I think he had started 2008 by sort of having a Prado-esque kind of dalliance with riding in California and set everything up. So he spent the whole year basically telling us, yeah, when I go to America, everything's going to be great, and I just want to go as quick as possible. So we're like, yeah, okay, mate, well, you get on with it. So I think there was also more people. There was more goodwill for Rattray to win because he had come so close. In 2005, he had wrecked his knee, which was, I think, his first year on the 250 four-stroke. And, he couldn't buy a start in 2007 against Cairoli, so he was outmatched. Christophe Borsau had also been in there. Red Bull KTM were sort of the dominant team, and Searle, I think, went 1-1 at the final round in Italy, and I remember him coming across the finish line in the second moto, just having a long look behind him because Rattray was there. I think Rattray took a 3-4 or something, but he got the points he needed. I think he finished something like, from 15 GPs, he had 12 or 13, 14 podiums. So Rattray really was sort of the dominant rider on the block. And it wasn't really a great surprise when at the Motocross of Nations, he announced that he was jumping out of his KTM contract and signing for Mitch Payton at Pro Circuit. I think the timing of it was surprising. It was like, that was kind of late to happen. But once Tyler had the chance to go to the US, then it was inevitable. And it was a bit gutting, actually, for Red Bull KTM because they lost both Searle and Rattray. So for sort of 2009, they had to completely reset in MX2. But yeah, it was a pretty good. I mean, it's not the first time, Lewis, that we've seen teammates going for the World Championship, especially in Red Bull KTM colours. So it was all a bit close. Also, as a little side note, it was the first World Championship for Stefan Everts. Since he sort of retired and moved across to be Red Bull KTM team manager, and by that point had started shaping some of the 350 SXF.
I have so many. Honestly, we're going to have to do a lot more podcasts. I want to talk about 2006 quickly, but I'm not going to do that. So Rattray, from my memory, it was very much similar to Coppins. It was like, he has to win. Surely this year will be the year. 05, I distinctly remember he won the first... I want to say he won the first GP, got injured, came back and won the last 3 GPs in a row. Maybe he even won.
Yeah.
Or did he win the first 3 and the last 3? I almost want to say that.
Yeah, he broke his knee. So he had an injury problems.
06?
But
I don't remember him in 06.
No, I don't think it's fair to say he should have been world champion in 2008 because Cairoli was really the man. I mean, he didn't show it at Budds Creek at the Nations, but 2007, he was just absolutely awesome. But there were other riders around. I mean, Gareth Swanepoel as well was really unlucky. I mean, he was on the Kawasaki, but I think he had broken his wrist or he had an operation, so he was out for a few months. And then when Cairoli had his injury, I mean, Nicolas Orban finished 3rd in the championship. But, Nick Orban's such a classy character anyway. I think by the final Grand Prix, he was saying, I'm only 3rd in the championship because Tony got injured and I was able to pick up some more points. But let me ask you this, Lewis. Let me test your knowledge. Who won the Belgian Grand Prix?
In 08?
In 2008.
Oh, you don't even... The point that I've referenced, this is my go-to round. Gert Krestenov, 8-1. 8-1? 8-1. To this day, it still makes no sense to me. And I will never quite understand. And there are so many riders who never quite won a GP. But Gert Krestenov did.
Welcome to Lommel.
8-1 as well. Find an 8-1 that gets you on the podium. Most of the time, that's good for 4th, maybe 3rd. A win. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So
Is
in my
the definition of a one-hit wonder?
Gert Krestenov is a GP winner. Just that will never quite sit right with me. So in my little research or perusing the internet, I did find photos from Lommel, actually, of Red Bull KTM announcing Tyler Rattray to race for 450 for them in 2009. So surely there had to be some... I mean, fair play to KTM for letting him go, first of all, but there also had to be some ill will, some bitterness, because the deal's done. Like you said, it's late in the day.
Yeah, my memory, though, is of Pit Byra being pretty much, Tyler's been a great servant. I mean, he signed for the factory team in 2004. He was teammate to Ben Townley, but still riding the 125. So he'd been there a few years. And Tyler brought everything he needed in 2008. I mean, he had his own personal trainer, a guy called Russell White, who was over, and he just put everything together. A lot of time for Tyler, and sort of like his stepbrother, his dad was still very much on the scene, and his late mum, Tracy, as well. She was always really pleasant to sort of talk to. A great family. And I think he just was one of those guys that was immensely likable. So when he explained that he had to chase a career dream and go over to the US, then people were a bit sort of surprised by it. But it was also a weird time for KTM because they were trying to set up a factory, or try to revive their factory team in North America, which ultimately was doomed. I mean, you can ask Tommy Searle about that. And yeah, it was... Pit Byra was still trying to get everything sorted out, and it was not too far away from signing Roger DaCosta and swinging the whole thing into motion. But I'm trying to remember who were the MX2 riders for 2009, because they would have signed Hurlings during 2009.
Sean and Goncalves.
Yeah, and Sean, of course, broke his leg when his bike had a problem while testing, and that was after he'd taken his first Grand Prix podium at Valkenswaard. So it was like round 2 or 3.
This is two things. This is a bizarre reference that I'm sure you won't remember. Was it 2008? I think it might have been 07. Valkenswaard, there was that photo in, I don't know where I saw it, of Rattray basically doing a front flip over one of the jumps. Like, the photo was literally him full rotation. Do you remember this?
Oh, goodness.
Would Ray have taken that?
I want to say yes.
It might. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it wasn't Rattray, but this, I've got this real vivid image of this photo in my head.
Yeah.
And
it's like Valkenswaard, if it didn't rain, it could be really hard and bumpy and just really horrible track to ride. But when it did and carved up, it was, really kind of Lommel-esque and long kind of elongated bumps.
And secondly, prior to 2008, Sean Simpson was not, in my opinion, as a spectator, tipped or almost relevant. Floundering with Wolf Sport Honda and Lizard Honda and Wolf Sport Kawasaki. I mean, maybe it was just the fact he was in Wolf Sport. But in 2008, he came out of nowhere in my mind. Do you have any explanation for this? And is my assessment of out of nowhere accurate?
It's all a combination of him getting a bit older. I mean, I think he may have been 18 or something. I mean, I can't remember his age, but also I think they were largely whipping like a 3-legged donkey with the Honda and also the Kawasaki, the 7-Up Kawasaki in 2007. I remember Sean crashing at the top of the hill in Fines and breaking his wrist. He just seemed to fall off a lot and, showed promise but didn't get the results. But like Barragan, once he got on a KTM, it was the perfect marriage. And I think he finished 4th in 2008, which got him the factory seat for 2009. And then when he broke his leg and had that serious injury, then that was also when KTM drafted Marvin Musquin into the setup after his very messy dissolution with the NGS Honda team. So, at one point, Red Bull KTM, again, sort of became like a 3-man operation in MX2 once Sean was fit. But Yeah, good rider at the time. I mean, and also he had a long, successful association till to this day with KTM because the way that he dropped out of the factory team was really kind of like a state of unfinished business. I think KTM had a lot of just respect and affection for him and the family. I mean, Stefan Simpson, his brother, still sort of works with WP and the KTM guys to this day.
Yeah, I just remember that coming out of nowhere. But actually, to the previous point, we never answered this. 2008, Nagel was the only Red Bull KTM 450 rider. But what surprised me is Goncalves was already on the MX2 team. Well, I didn't realise that was already happening in 2008 from memory. But there you go. So you weren't writing KTM PRs at this point?
2008? No, I don't think I was. No.
Wonder who would have been. Your emotional, sorry. Your point about Marvin, I wanted to point that out because 2009 is the ultimate reset where we essentially went into 2009 MX2. Rattray was gone, Caroli was gone, Tommy was gone. No one, like Sean Simpson was the guy, but even that, like it was so unproven that people, in my opinion, again, not the expert, it was like, what the hell is going to happen? Marvin was 14th in the MX2 Championship in 2008, straight up. So that should perfectly illustrate just how much of a surprise the Paulin-Marvin combo force in 2009 was.
Yeah, and don't forget Ken Roxon as well. I mean, he came in at round 5 and had an immediate impact as well. And it's funny just the way that MX2 kind of tends to reset, not in between generations, it's kind of quicker than that. It seems to be every sort of 5 years, there's an exodus and an influx. And I don't think the 23 age rule was in place until about 2011, I want to say. So there was nothing in place then. I wonder if there were, I have to go and look at the results, but I wonder if there were any kind of veterans racing the class. I don't know if someone like Kiko Chiodi was still racing then, or someone that was blatantly in 08, in their late kind of 20s. I mean, even someone like Pascal Larray, I think he was sort of mid-20s. But yeah, it's something we'd have to look at. But
Stephen Sword was there?
Yeah.
Molson Kawasaki?
Stephen Sword was still there. Still riding Kawasaki, yeah.
That was his...
Carl Nunn was still riding GPs then? I'm not sure.
I think that was Sword's first year back from his... Guarneri, would he have been old at that point? I guess not. No, he would have still been quite young.
More than 23.
Yeah, sorry.
It was...
So another rider, Pascal Larray, criminally underrated, really good rider. Manuel Priem, criminally underrated, very good rider. Xavier Boug, always had a little bit of a soft spot for Xavier Boug, and I don't know why, but good rider, deserved more. Right?
Yeah, it was pretty solid. I mean, I'd categorize him as a sort of, maybe not as good as Steve Ramon, but just one of those riders where he could get like a flash result on one day, but then just kind of injury prone as well.
Yeah, like Xavier Boug deserves some more respect, I think. Can we talk about, I think this is my final point on MX2. We've shoehorned this in quite nicely. The curious case of Nicolas Alban. Alban. So good. Very similar to Strybos very similar to Strybos in two ways. One, he always won at Lockett, or was always very good at Lockett, I shouldn't say always won. And two, his career just nosedived spectacularly out of nowhere, without explanation. And fortunately, Strybos managed to correct course, but Alban never did.
Alban, I think, was a combination of the pressure of being Yamaha's main rider when Cairoli moved up, and also just injury. I think he, again, just missed his window. I don't remember too much around the time, but Nico was seen as one of those riders that had the talent. I mean, there are parallels to maybe like a rider like Julian Lieber, perhaps, where, the technique is there on the bike, all the possibilities, but just something missing.
That's a really good comparison. And also Julian Lieber, another rider who we will probably reference at some point as a good rider who just didn't really get the respect or the notice that he deserved. Let me just run through a quick ad read. for you because we've been slacking with that so far. All Balls Racing. The All Balls Racing Group is a combination of the finest aftermarket power sports brands from across the US and Europe. Combining OEM-level engineering and design capabilities with a world-class supply chain makes them the largest global supplier of critical aftermarket hard parts for the power sports industry. You can trust the All Balls Racing Group to provide the exact fitment and best quality in the industry at a price that fits your budget. They have everything to keep you running. And while I'm here, let me tell you about EVS Sports. Experience the pinnacle of knee protection and injury prevention with the new EVS Web Eclipse knee brace. For over 39 years, EVS has relentlessly honed their engineering expertise, consistently delivering award-winning knee protection. This legacy of excellence is embedded in every facet of the new Web Eclipse, which represents the culmination of their tireless dedication to innovation and rider safety. Thank you to EVS All Balls Racing and Polisport for their support of this podcast. I don't know if that PR came out, but I'm going to announce it anyway because I don't know what's going on. Maybe I bigged this up too much. It's finally official that Ben Watson has re-signed with Beta. So we don't know why the PR's taken so long. No one knows. But I can say that we are confident already in these early stages. We are back on a bike and we are confident in 2025 because the Beta has made significant improvements. And let's just say 2025 is going to be the year of Ben Watson. So, I don't know why that's... I mean, it might not even be announced yet, but honestly, it's taking so long and no one knows. So...
but to be honest, though, by the time this podcast is out, it'll probably be announced, won't it?
Okay, well, I'll announce the second rider too. Tom Cock, the second rider.
Okay.
Beta took a punt on quite a few big names, ended up with Tom Cock. So that's how that went.
That's all right.
Yeah, I know, but they took a punt on much bigger names. I guess I shouldn't say who they called, but there was... I shouldn't say that. No, that is not a story for the podcast. Or is it? There's one rider who Beta called them. They never answered and never returned the call. They just said, nope, I'm good. Oh. Literally, we didn't even want to hear what they had to say. We're just like, nope. But from what I know, Beta, significant improvements from 2025. More bottom end is what we need for better starts. It's coming.
Right.
It's coming. Right. 2008.
Well, after injury, I think Ben has to sort of reset. You know, I mean, he's got to show again once more that it's all possible.
I'll be there in his corner, flying the flag.
Can I just also remind people that in 2008 in MXGP, we had Suzuki, which are not present anymore, but you did have other brands. I mean, Aprilia were racing, TM were racing. You're only 1 year away from CCM racing in Grand Prix as well. So it's, Ducati and Triumph are coming into Grand Prix, but there were, kind of other sort of brands hovering around.
Maybe this is really weird to say, and I hope this isn't taken the wrong way, but David Luongo has beat the drum a few times of look how strong we are with the manufacturers coming in. But based on what you've said, we've kind of just corrected course and finally got back to where we were 16 years ago. Negative, pessimistic, maybe? I don't know. But just, what you just said has resonated with me on that front.
Yeah, I don't think Aprilia, TM, and CCM were coming into the sport by heralding it as the ultimate promotional window for their products, which now seems to be the trend for anybody new investing in racing. It's like it's a big investment. It's a lot of money. So, then it just seemed to be, okay, this is the accepted thing that we do. But, now I think it's very much like a vindication of a series.
I would just like to add as well one more name to the Prime Luray Boog category.
Bracket.
Julian Bill. I always also felt a bit of respect for Julian Bill. When he was on Martin Honda especially, I felt like he was a good rider. Deserved more credit.
Moto3 world champion. Was he the last Moto3 world champion, or was that Matthias Walkner?
I presume you mean MX3. You confused me then. I thought that Julian Bill had just gone to Moto3. I was like, what?
Did I say Moto3?
Yeah,
I mean MX3.
Oh, dear. Okay. Honestly, I spun out then. I was like, did I not? Julian Bill had a whole other career that I didn't know about. Like, what?
Yeah, MX3. Once the 650cc category, well, 650 category, and then...
Let me end on this, because this is the last note that I wrote down. In their career, Dodika, Ramon had 5 GP wins. It's a low number, isn't it? Like, Ramon was a 2-time world champion with 5 GP wins. It's just the correlation between those numbers is off.
Yeah, I'd agree. But then also remember he was operating from maybe half of his career inside the Everts era. He raced Stefan for 3 seasons. So there's 3 seasons where he's going to get scraps on the table.
So is Steve Ramon overrated? Is Steve Ramon Jordi Tixier?
Oh, that's a good question. As a rider, no. I think he had great skill. As a racer, maybe could have achieved more. And maybe that's down to mentality. But he was a worker. He had technique, and he could ride the motorcycle without doubt. And you could say, look, he did the job. I mean, he represented the brand. He brought a world championship to Suzuki. So what more do you need?
Yeah, it's just like two world titles, not one, not Tixier one. Okay, flash in the pan. 2 world titles to do it twice and very nearly a third in 2008, and just 5 GP wins. You could study that so intently. I feel.
That's why Jeffrey Hurlings has ruined it for everybody because. But don't forget, Ramon won those titles by being on the best bike in the best team, and But there's a reason why he's there, isn't there?
Yeah, I guess. And I remember, and almost these numbers have hurt his image because in the time, I remember looking at Ramon as as you say, Everts is here, but Strybos, Ramon, Smets are all in this. I almost had Ramon in the Coppins category. Coppins was at the top, but Ramon was in that mix of podium guy, I guess. But yeah, as time's gone on, these stats just have not matured well.
I mean, if racers really care about their legacy, and I think maybe some do as they reflect on their careers when they're retired, but at the time they certainly don't give a shit. They really live for the moment, which maybe is a fallacy. But Ramon didn't have the personality, didn't have the character to inspire kids. He had his fans. There was loads of them.
The bomb.
But but even now, look at it. Look at Stefan Everts, one of the best riders ever, with amazing career stats. One of which is probably never going to be beaten with the 10 world titles. But if someone stopped me in the street and pointed a finger in my face and said, "Who's the greatest motocross rider ever?" my first reaction is to say Tony Cairoli, just because Cairoli also had the numbers, but the way he rode the motorcycle and the way that he adapted and the way he was as a person just had far more reach. There was something about him that resonated much more. So maybe it's just a recency bias thing as well. I don't know.
That's interesting. I never heard someone define Everts' career beyond the numbers, so that's actually quite informative. Also, I touched on it there. Steve Ramon's nickname, The Bomb, maybe the most inappropriate nickname ever for a rider. That. Yeah, that's like calling Jago Gertz The Bomb. It's it's more of a simmer.
Yeah, but to be honest, but what rider nicknames actually are cool or good?
Well, I think the Watson Wagon's quite inventive.
The Watson Wagon is lame. So is the Sexton Ship. Oh. Come on, we're talking about rider nicknames, Lewis. I don't mean to be personal.
Oh, I don't know. You may not mean to be, Adam, but that struck a chord.
Go time.
The Bullet, I think the Bullet is quite good and appropriate for Hurlings.
The Bullet's okay for a 16-year-old.
I honestly, I can't even think of another nickname. I still call Kevin Strybos for Kid when I can. That is a weird nickname.
That's probably why he likes you. Yeah, that is a weird nickname.
But the Kid.
I can remember remember checking into a hotel at the Spanish Grand Prix, and Alexander Tonkov was chasing Jeffrey Hurlings, saying, "Hey, Bullet, Bullet, Bullet," and Hurlings was not paying any attention to whatsoever. And I was thinking, try out calling him by his name, and then maybe he'll hear you and listen to you. But
Tommy Gunn,
slightly odd.
2008 nickname. Tommy Gunn was okay.
Well. No, come on.
The Lizard?
There's no good ones, is it?
Coppins? Why the Lizard?
That's terrible as well.
Where did that come from? I don't know where that would have...
Why even bother having a nickname? What's wrong with your normal name?
Okay, well, I'm sorry, Adam. I'll try and.
It's a sensitive topic, Lewis. I mean, the
I'll try and
Martinator has just won
spread the word.
MotoGP.
My final point that I wanted to illustrate or explain or get out there, and I've said this before, Tommy Searle, 14 GP wins, the most MX2 GP wins without a title. We do forget just how good Tommy Searle was, and that's with missing 2 years in America. Like, we do forget, like, Tommy Searle also belongs in the Coppins category, the Strybos category of, realistically, if it had gone correctly, should have been at least a one-time world champion.
Yeah, and three times runner-up in championship.
Yep, 7, 8, and 12, and then third in 2011.
So, do you think he classifies as the best British rider in the modern era?
Yes. Well, there's Ben Watson. Well, Ben Watson's still going, so yes, Tommy Searle can have that title for now.
You know, Ben's a Grand Prix winner. Sean Simpson's he's won Grand Prix in. Actually, did he win in MX2? No, he didn't, did he? So it's just just MXGP. I mean, there's only 2 British riders who have won in the Premier class since the beginning of the century.
Oh, realistically, I think Tommy has that title, and it's not even a conversation. I do not believe, like Max Ansky is one of my best friends. But the numbers don't lie. Like, Tommy Searle is, and to be honest, probably will be for some time, because it's not like anyone's coming up. Tommy Searle is still flying the flag for British motocross as the #1 British MXGP rider. MXGP as in the series, not class.
We have to mention Jamie Dobb as well. He's the last British world champion. Maybe he's got nearly 14 Grand Prix wins. I'd say.
So obviously Dobb is way before, well, not way before my time, but like I was effectively unaware at that point. The world title obviously puts him ahead of Tommy, but if you kind of disregard that a little bit, was Tommy's career actually better?
I mean, Jamie also took podium finish in Supercross. I mean, he was in the US.
His MXGP career. Boiling it down to your question about Tommy being the best MXGP rider. Maybe I'm not the person to comment because Tommy happened in a time where I was super fan and Dobb was just before my time. But I feel like you can make an argument that Tommy was actually better than Dobb.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
More bikes, more teams, both series. Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well,
three runner-up, championship finishes, I think says a lot.
Right. Are we done? I feel like we'll never be done, but are we done for now? I feel like what we've earned from this podcast is a new segment where we text a rider each week and ask, "Were you an asshole?" That was quite fun. No, honestly, genuinely, this has fulfilled all of my expectations and my wishes. I don't know if anyone else will care or enjoy it, but there must be someone out there like me who, there was a point where I almost couldn't talk because I was processing this new information and these questions that I had for 16 years. So I thank you for your input. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for sitting there. And this has genuinely been moving.
Yeah, we have to pick another year.
Honestly, let's just do them all. We'll start from 2004, so like the modern era of MXGP, and let's just do it.
Oh, there's a couple of years where it was very fraught and dramatic.
We won't do 2022.
Like you said.
We won't do 2022.
No one
cares.
We'll skip that.
2015 was my first year covering the sport. I use that loosely because I was so new without knowing anyone and so shy, as you probably remember, but covering is a loose word. But you were obviously heavily involved with Monster at the time, so I think for Villapoto's transition, and also I feel like you would have a lot to add on that, especially I feel like the main talk of Villapoto's transition is what happened towards the end of 2014, the lead up to it, because actually the result was fairly meh. But yeah.
It was Villapoto coming to MXGP still now it's nearly 10 years later, but there was so much hype around the championship. It felt like there was more people talking about Grand Prix racing than ever before. And I've probably said this before on a podcast, but to get to a point where a rider like Tony Cairoli is even refusing to do pre-first Grand Prix interviews, is an indication of how much kind of spotlight and attention and pressure there was building up around it. And, it seemed like there was more media, more attention, more clamor for some of Ryan's time compared to any other rider, even from the fans' side as well. That first Grand Prix in Nelkin in Argentina still hasn't been a crowd that big.
And then Max Nagel came out and was the dominant force. So work that one out. I bet you could have interviewed him if you'd wanted to pre-season, Adam, but bet you didn't make that call.
Oh. Well, it all fell apart in Germany, didn't it?
Of all places. Right. Thank you, Polosport, All Balls Racing, and EVS Sports. Thank you to you people for watching and listening to this. Please let us know if you enjoyed it, because I would very much like to do another one of these, but we probably need you to tell us whether you liked it, because we can't go solely off of my preference. So let us know. Thank you for watching and listening, and we will see you real soon.